Proclus, The Elements of Theology, translated by Juan and Maria Balboa, Propositions 1 through 6. Proposition 1. All multitude participates in a certain way of the one, for if it participates in no way of the one, neither would the whole be one, nor each of the many of which the multitude consists. But from each of these multitudes, even more multitudes would arise, and this will be the case into infinity. And each of these infinities would, in turn, be an infinite multitude, for by in no way at all participating the one, neither according to the whole itself, nor according to each of the many contained in self, it would be infinite in every particular case and according to all. For each of the many which you may take up would be either one or not one, and if not one, then either is many or nothing. Whereas if, on the other hand, each is nothing, that being, out of which these also consist, would be nothing. And if, on the other hand, each is many, each will consist of an infinite amount of infinities. But this is impossible. For neither are any of the real beings composed of an infinite amount of infinities, for there could not be more than that which is infinite, but that whole, out of which all beings consist, is more than each. Nor is it possible for anything to be composed out of that which in no way exists. Accordingly, then, all multitude participates in a certain way of the one. Proposition 2. All that participate of the one are both one and not one. For if all is not oneself, for it partakes of the one by being something else besides the one, it has experienced that participation through the one and sustains having become one. If, on the other hand, it is nothing besides the one, then it is simply one and does not participate of the one, but it would be oneself. But if, on the other hand, it is something else besides that which is not one, but that which participates of the one, is both not one and one, not the very one, but one being, by participating of the one. Accordingly, then, by this, it is not one, nor the very one, but one being, by, at the same time, participating of the one, and through this, it is not one, according to self-origination, resources, hyparxis, since it is both one and not one, by being something else besides the one. On the one hand, insofar it abounds, it is not one. But on the other hand, insofar as it has experienced the one, it is one. Accordingly, then, all that participates of the one is both one and not one. Proposition 3. All that becomes one by participating of the one. For if, on the other hand, self is not one, then on the other hand, it is one, insofar as it has experienced the participation of the one. For if those which are not one in and by themselves were to become one, then surely they would unite and commune with each other in order to become one and abide in the presence of the one, but not by being the very one. Accordingly, then, this one participates of the one insofar as it is that which experiences coming to be one. For if on the one hand it is already one, then it will not become one. For by being that one, it cannot become that which it is already. But if they become one out of that which was formerly not one, then that certain one that has been generated in themselves has come into being as one. Proposition 4. All that is united is other than the one self. For if it is united, then this must participate in a certain way of the one, insofar as it is also said to be united. However, that which participates of the one is both one and not one. For if this one self were also one and not one, then in turn the one in self would also have both of these, and this would proceed to infinity. If there were no one self which would enable it to stop, but all would be one and not one. Accordingly then, there is something that is united, which is other than the one. For if the one were the same with the united, then an infinite multitude would result, and so also for each one of those beings of which the united consists. Proposition 5. All multitude is secondary or subsequent to the one. For if many were prior to the one, then on the one hand, the one would partake of many. If the many were prior to the one, then on the other hand, it would not partake of the one, if indeed that multitude existed before one came to be. For it could not participate of that which has no being, since that which participates of the one is both one and at the same time not one. But one would not yet exist, by many being the first. However, it is impossible that there could be a certain multitude which in no way whatsoever participates of the one. Accordingly then, multitude is not prior to the one. But surely then, if such a nature coexisted at the same time with the one, and they were coordinate with each other, for nothing in time prevents it, then neither is the one according to self many, nor is the multitude one. By such a nature being oppositely divided at the same time, if indeed neither is prior or posterior to the other. Thus, multitude according to self will not be the one, and each of those in self will not be the one. And this will be the case to infinity, which is manifestly impossible. Accordingly then, multitude, according to its own nature, participates of the one, and it will be in no way possible to grasp any part which is not one. For by not being one, it will be an infinite number of infinities, as it has been demonstrated. Accordingly then, multitude entirely participates of the one. If on the one hand, the one, which is according to the one self, in no way participates of multitude, then multitude will be entirely posterior, later than the one, and so multitude participates of the one, whereas it is not participated by the one. But on the other hand, if the one also participates of multitude by subsisting, on the one hand, as one through hyparxis, but on the other hand, by subsisting as not one through participation, then the one will be multiple, just as multitude is united through the one. Accordingly then, the one will commune with the multitude, and multitude with the one. But of those that come together and commune in a certain way with each other, if on the one hand they are collected together by something else, that something else is prior to selves. But if, on the other hand, they collect selves by themselves, then they are not opposed to each other. For opposites do not hasten to each other, but run away from each other. If then the one and multitude were oppositely divided, and multitude insofar as multitude is not one, and the one insofar as one is not multitude, neither will either of these arising in the other be one and at the same time also two. But certainly, if there were something prior to selves, which collects selves, this will either be one or not one. But if it is not one, it will either be many or nothing. It will not, however, be many, in order that there be no multitude prior than one, nor can it be nothing, for how can nothing come together? Accordingly, then, it is one alone. For certainly, this which is the one cannot be many, in order that there not be a progression to infinity. Therefore it is the one self, and from the one self all multitude proceeds. Proposition 6. All multitude arises either out of the united or out of unities. For on the one hand, it is clear that each one of the many will not be self-multitude alone, and in turn, that each one of this multitude will also not be self-multitude alone. But if, on the other hand, each is not multitude alone, then each is either united or a unity. And if, on the one hand, each participates of the one, then each one is united. But if, on the other hand, each one arises out of that which is primarily united, then each one will be a unity. For if the one self is, then there is also that which primarily participates of self by that which is primarily united. But this arises out of unities. For if this arises out of the united, and in turn the united arises out of certain unities, there will also be the case without ever ceasing. Surely then, it is necessary that that which is primarily united must arise out of unities, and we have discovered what we set out to prove from the beginning.